The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched for nearly a mile in every direction. Floating platforms held delegates from over 400 different species, each one representing billions of lives across thousands of worlds. The ceiling was made of transparent crystal that showed the stars beyond, a reminder of what they all shared. But today, Ambassador Catherine Shaw was not thinking about shared destinies. She was thinking about endings. She stood at the human delegation's podium, a simple metal platform that had always been placed near the back of the chamber. In 73 years of membership, humanity had never been given a better position. They were always the newcomers, always the young species that needed to prove themselves. Catherine had spent her entire career proving herself. She was tired. The chamber was filled with the usual noise of translation devices and whispered conversations. The Velthari delegates, tall beings covered in shimmering scales that changed color with their moods, were discussing something with the Korvathi, whose 4 eyes and 6 limbs made them look like insects to human eyes. The ancient Arshanet, the oldest species in the council, sat in their elevated positions and looked down at everyone else with the patience of beings who measured time in millennia. "Hi, Counselor." Thren of the Arshanet raised one of his long, thin arms, and the chamber slowly fell silent. His species had led the council for 8,000 years. They had seen empires rise and fall, had watched young species destroy themselves in wars and famines. They believed they had seen everything. They had not seen what was coming. "The council recognizes the human delegation," Thren said, his voice carrying through the chamber without any need for amplification. "Ambassador Shaw, you requested emergency speaking time. This is unusual. Please explain." Catherine took a breath. Behind her, the rest of the human delegation sat in silence. They all knew what she was about to say. They had voted on it 3 months ago, in a closed session on Earth that had lasted for 16 hours. The decision had not been easy, but it had been nearly unanimous. "Hi, Counselor," Catherine began. "I have a statement to read on behalf of the United Earth Government and all human colonies. I ask that I not be interrupted until I have finished." Thren's ancient eyes, deep purple and filled with thousands of years of wisdom, studied her for a moment. Then he nodded. Catherine looked down at the paper in her hands. She had written these words herself, revised them dozens of times, practiced them in front of mirrors and colleagues. But now that the moment had come, she found that she did not need the paper. She knew every word by heart. For 73 years, humanity has been a member of this council. In that time, we have done everything that was asked of us, and more. When the Kathrani plague threatened to wipe out the syndicate worlds, it was human doctors who developed the cure. When the hyperspace beacon network began to fail, it was human engineers who rebuilt it. When the Velthari and Korvathi went to war the first time, it was human diplomats who negotiated the peace. She paused, looking around the chamber. Some delegates were nodding, perhaps expecting this to be another speech asking for recognition or thanks. They were wrong. "We did these things because we believed in the ideals of this council. We believed in cooperation. We believed in peace. We believed that if we worked hard enough, if we proved ourselves enough, we would eventually be accepted as equals." Catherine's voice hardened. "We were wrong." The chamber stirred. The Velthari delegate scales flickered from blue to orange, a sign of confusion. The Korvathi's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. In 73 years, humanity has never been granted full voting rights. Our colonies are subject to trade restrictions that apply to no other species. Our ships are searched at borders that others pass through freely. And just last year, this council spent 6 months debating whether humans possess, and I quote, "sufficient emotional depth to be considered fully sentient." The silence in the chamber was absolute now. "We have read your academic papers about us. We have seen the studies that describe us as aggressive, primitive, and dangerously unpredictable. We have watched as our requests for equal treatment were tabled, delayed, and forgotten. We have waited patiently for 73 years. Catherine set down her paper and looked directly at High Counselor Thren. "We are done waiting." The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted questions, demanded explanations, called for order. Thren pounded his gavel against his podium, the sound echoing like thunder, but no one listened. Catherine raised her voice over the chaos. Effective immediately. The United Earth government is withdrawing from the Galactic Council. We are closing our embassies, recalling our diplomats, and terminating all joint development programs. Our peacekeeping forces will return home within 30 days. Our scientists will end their collaborations. Our trade agreements will expire and not be renewed. This is madness, shouted the Velthari delegate. You cannot simply leave, Catherine replied calmly. There is nothing in the charter that prevents it. We checked. But the consequences, said a syndicate representative, his mechanical voice trembling with something that sounded like fear. The projects you are involved in, the systems you maintain, the negotiations you are conducting, you cannot simply abandon them. We are not abandoning them. We are returning them to the Council. They were never our responsibility alone. They were supposed to be shared burdens. But somehow, over 73 years, they became our burdens exclusively. We did not notice it happening. Perhaps you did not either. But it happened. Catherine gathered her materials and stepped down from the podium. Her delegation rose to follow her. Ambassador Shaw, Thren called out, his ancient voice finally cutting through the noise. Please, let us discuss this. The Council can form a committee, review your concerns. Perhaps some adjustments can be made. Catherine stopped and turned to face him. Counselor, humanity has served on 14 committees dedicated to reviewing our status in this council. Each one reached the same conclusion, that we deserved better treatment. And each time, those recommendations were ignored. We have run out of patience for committees. She began walking toward the exit. The other human delegates fell into step behind her, their faces carefully neutral. They had all agreed that this moment must be handled with dignity. Not anger. Near the back of the delegation, junior diplomat Nathan Cole walked beside his mentor, senior diplomat Richard Hayes. Nathan was only 32 years old and had spent just 4 years in the diplomatic corps. He had believed when he started that he could make a difference, that he could help humanity find its place in the galaxy. Now he was walking away from that dream. Sir, he said quietly, do you think they understand what this means? Richard looked back at the chaos they were leaving behind. Delegates were arguing with each other, blaming each other, trying to figure out who was responsible for this disaster. No one was looking at the humans anymore. They'd already been forgotten, already been dismissed as emotional and irrational. No, Richard said. They do not understand. They think we are bluffing. They think we will come back in a few months, apologize, and accept whatever scraps they offer us. Will we? Richard smiled, but there was no joy in it. Earth voted 94% in favor of withdrawal, Nathan. The colonies voted even higher. Our people are done. Whatever happens next, we are not going back to the way things were. They reached the great doors of the chamber. Catherine Shaw was waiting there, holding the door open for her people. As Nathan passed her, she put a hand on his shoulder. This is the hard part, she said softly. Walking away is always the hard part, but sometimes it is the only choice that matters. Nathan nodded and stepped through the door. Behind him, the chamber still echoed with confusion and anger. Ahead of him, the corridor stretched toward the human embassy, where packing had already begun. The galaxy had taken humanity for granted for 73 years. Now, it would learn what that had cost them. 3 months had passed since the humans walked out of the Galactic Council chamber, and the universe was beginning to crack. Fleet Commander Gregory Palmer sat in his office on Luna Base, Earth's primary military installation, and watched the tactical displays with a cup of coffee in his hand. The screens showed the border between Velthari and Corvathi space, where warships were gathering like storm clouds before rain. Red dots represented Velthari vessels. Blue dots were Corvathi. There were a lot of dots. Lieutenant Maria Santos stood beside him, her young face tight with worry. She had joined the fleet 5 years ago, full of idealism and hope. She had believed that humanity's role as peacekeepers made them special, made them important. Now she was watching 2 species prepare to destroy each other, and she was not allowed to do anything about it. Sir, she said, we are receiving distress signals from civilian vessels in the region. They are asking for escort out of the conflict zone. Forward the signals to the Galactic Council, Palmer replied, without looking up from his coffee. They handle civilian protection now. But, sir, the Council does not have any ships in that sector. Their nearest peacekeeping force is 3 weeks away. Then they should have planned better. Maria stared at him. Sir, those are innocent people. Traitors, families, refugees. They will die if no one helps them. Palmer finally looked at her. His face was not cruel, but it was tired. He had served in the human peacekeeping forces for 30 years. He had lost friends in conflicts that were not his own, fighting for species that called him primitive behind his back. He had given everything to the galaxy, and the galaxy had given him nothing in return. He said quietly, 6 years ago, I led a rescue mission to save Korvathi colonists from a solar flare event. We lost 4 ships and 87 crew members. Do you know what the Korvathi Council said afterward? Maria shook her head. They said that the human intervention, while appreciated, was unnecessary, and probably made things worse. They suggested that we were too emotional to handle crisis situations effectively. Amr set down his coffee. I have followed my orders for 30 years. I have buried my friends for 30 years. I am done. If the Council wants those civilians saved, they can save them themselves. The distress signals continued to come in for 3 more days. Then they stopped. No one talked about what had happened to the ships that had been calling for help. On Nexus Prime, the capital world of the Galactic Council, High Counselor Thren was discovering that running a galaxy was much harder without humans. He had not realized how much they did. It was embarrassing, really. The humans had been so quiet about their contributions, so willing to work in the background while others took the credit. They had maintained the hyperspace beacon network, a thankless job that required constant attention and technical skill. They had staffed the diplomatic corps with mediators who could somehow get bitter enemies to sit down and talk. They had developed agricultural techniques that fed dozens of worlds and medical treatments that cured diseases in species very different from their own, and they had done all of this while being treated like children. Thren sat in his private chambers, reading reports that grew worse by the day. The Velthari-Korvathi conflict had escalated beyond anything he had expected. Both sides were demanding that the Council intervene, but the Council had no way to intervene. Human mediators had always handled these situations. Without them, the other species did not know where to begin. Surely someone can negotiate, Thren had said in the last council meeting. The Syndicate offered, replied the Velthari delegate, but the Korvathi do not trust them. The Communion offered, but the Velthari do not trust them. Everyone trusted the humans. Why? Thren had asked, genuinely confused. The chamber had gone silent. Finally, a young Merchant Guild representative had spoken up. Because the humans never wanted anything from us, she said. They negotiated peace because they believed in peace, not because they were trying to gain advantage. They were the only species in the galaxy with no hidden agenda, and we treated them like fools for it. Thren sent a message to Earth that night, requesting temporary assistance with the Velthari-Korvathi situation. He wrote it carefully, using respectful language, and acknowledging that humanity had valid concerns. He thought it was a good message, a reasonable message. The response came back within hours, and it was only 2 sentences long. We appreciate your communication. Earth wishes both parties a peaceful resolution. We have full confidence in the Galactic Council's ability to manage its internal affairs. Nothing more. No offer of help, no opening for negotiation, no hint that the humans might reconsider. Just polite words that said absolutely nothing. Thren read the message 5 times, trying to find some hidden meaning. There was none. The humans had said exactly what they meant, nothing more and nothing less. It was infuriating. The Velthari-Korvathi War lasted 11 months. By the time it finally burned itself out, 14 Korvathi ships had been destroyed and 9 Velthari vessels had been lost. A civilian transport carrying 300 refugees had been caught in crossfire and vaporized. 2 colony worlds had been bombed, leaving millions homeless. It was the worst conflict the galaxy had seen in centuries, and it could have been prevented with a single human negotiator. But that was not the only crack appearing in Galactic. civilization. On the Rim Collective Worlds, far from the political center of the galaxy, farmers were discovering a terrible truth. For 40 years, they had been using crop strains developed by human scientists. These crops grew faster, produced more food, and resisted diseases that had plagued the Rim for generations. They had been a gift from humanity, shared freely without asking for anything in return. The licensing agreements for those crops expired 2 months after the withdrawal. The humans had offered to renew them, but only under the same terms as any other trade agreement, terms that the Rim Collective could not afford. Governor Sandra Mitchell of New Victoria, a human colony on the edge of explored space, watched the news reports with growing unease. She had supported the withdrawal, had voted for it in the Colonial Assembly. Her people had been treated as second-class citizens for too long, but she had not expected the rest of the galaxy to suffer so much. They could grow their own crops, she said to her advisor, a quiet man named Daniel Perry. They did it for thousands of years before we came along. They forgot how, Daniel replied. They threw away their old seeds, abandoned their traditional farming techniques. Why would they keep doing something the hard way when the humans were willing to do it for them? Sandra looked out her window at the fields of New Victoria, where human farmers worked land that humans had cleared with human tools. Her people had always been self-sufficient. They had never needed the galaxy's help, and the galaxy had never offered it. We did this to ourselves, she said quietly. We made them dependent on us, and then we left. Daniel shook his head. They made themselves dependent on us. We just offered help. They chose to take it without learning, without contributing, without even saying thank you. That was their choice, not ours. The famine on the Rim Collective Worlds would kill millions before it was over. The Galactic Council would eventually organize relief efforts, but they would be slow and poorly coordinated. Without human logistics experts to manage the distribution, food rotted in warehouses while people starved just miles away. And through it all, humanity stayed home. They watched the news. They felt sympathy for the suffering, but they did not intervene. They had spent 73 years being the galaxy's caretakers. Now it was someone else's turn. 6 months after humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, the true depth of the crisis became clear. It was not just one problem or two. It was everything, all at once, cascading like dominoes falling in slow motion. Dr. Linda Harrison sat in her apartment in Seattle, watching the news feeds from across the galaxy. She was 61 years old and had spent the last 30 years of her life working for the Galactic Medical Initiative, developing treatments for diseases that affected species she had never met in person. Her work had saved millions of lives, maybe billions. She had never counted. On the screen, a syndicate news anchor was reporting on the spread of the Kethrani plague. The disease had started on a small colony world, something that happened every few years in a galaxy with trillions of inhabitants. Normally, the Galactic Medical Initiative would have responded within days, sending teams of doctors and researchers to contain the outbreak and develop treatments. But the Galactic Medical Initiative had been 60% human. When humanity withdrew, most of its staff went home. Linda had received messages from her former colleagues, desperate pleas for help. Her friend Verl, a syndicate physician she had worked with for 15 years, had been particularly insistent. The plague is spreading faster than we can track, Verl had written. We do not have the expertise to develop a cure. Your research on cross-species viral mutations is exactly what we need. Please, Linda. Thousands are dying every day. Linda had forwarded the message to the Earth Health Ministry, as she was required to do under the new protocols. They had forwarded it to the Galactic Council with a polite note explaining that medical research sharing fell under the terminated cooperation agreements. If the Council wanted to renegotiate those agreements, they were welcome to submit a formal request. The formal request would take months to process. The plague would not wait months. Linda turned off the news and stared at the wall of her apartment. She had the research Verl needed. It was sitting on her computer, files she had worked on for years. She could send it with a single button press, save thousands of lives. Maybe more, but she did not send it. not because she did not care, but because she understood what was really happening. For 30 years, the galaxy had taken human medical expertise for granted. They had accepted cures and treatments without ever investing in their own research capabilities. Why would they, when the humans were always there to save them? If she sent that research now, nothing would change. The galaxy would survive this crisis, and then it would go back to ignoring human contributions until the next crisis came. The cycle would never end. Sometimes, Linda thought, you had to let people suffer the consequences of their choices, even when it hurt to watch. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out in 1,000 different ways. The hyperspace beacon network, the invisible infrastructure that made faster-than-light travel possible, had been maintained by human engineers for 50 years. It was boring work, technical, and repetitive, the kind of job that no one noticed until it stopped being done. The beacons needed constant adjustment, recalibration, repair. Without attention, they drifted out of alignment, and ships that relied on them began to disappear. In the first 3 months after the withdrawal, 17 ships vanished. By 6 months, the number had risen to over 100. Trade routes that had been safe for centuries became death traps. Merchant vessels refused to travel without armed escorts, and even then, some never arrived at their destinations. The merchant guilds held an emergency meeting on their home station, a massive structure orbiting a dying star. Guildmaster Patricia Venn, one of the few humans still involved in galactic trade, attended as an observer. She had chosen to remain in the guild rather than return to Earth, but she had no authority anymore. She was just there to watch. "The beacon network is failing," said a syndicate representative. His mechanical voice filled with something that sounded like panic. "We have lost 12% of our shipping capacity in 6 months. If this continues, trade will collapse entirely within 2 years. "Then fix the beacons," said a Velthri merchant, her scales flickering with impatience. "We do not know how. The humans did that work. We never learned." "Surely you kept records. Technical manuals. Something." The syndicate representative's lights flickered. "We kept records. But the work requires more than knowledge. It requires experience, intuition, understanding of systems that interact in complex ways. Our engineers have read the manuals. They cannot replicate what the humans did." Patricia Venn listened in silence. She remembered the engineers she had worked with over the years, quiet men and women who spent their lives in tiny maintenance pods, drifting between beacons in the vast emptiness of space. They had never been thanked, never been recognized, never been given so much as a promotion for keeping the galaxy connected. They had just done their jobs because the jobs needed doing. Now they were home, working on Earth's own beacon network, which had never been integrated into the galactic system. Earth's ships would continue to travel safely. Everyone else would have to figure things out on their own. On the council world of Nexus Prime, High Counselor Thren was holding another emergency session. "They seem to be having a lot of those lately. The situation is untenable," said the Arshanet representative, an ancient being whose name was so long that most species simply called him the Elder. "We are facing simultaneous crises in medical response, infrastructure maintenance, conflict resolution, agricultural production, and scientific research. Each of these crises is connected to the human withdrawal. Then we must convince the humans to return," said a communion delegate, her voice like wind through leaves. "We have tried," Thren replied. "They are not interested in our offers." "What have we offered them?" Thren hesitated. The truth was embarrassing, but there was no point in hiding it. "We offered to reconsider their voting rights within the next decade. We offered to review the trade restrictions over a 5-year period. We offered to form a committee to examine the question of human sentience." The chamber fell silent. "Those are the same offers we made 10 years ago," the Elder said slowly. "And 20 years ago, and 30 years ago, we offered them nothing new. What else can we offer?" Full voting rights would require changing the charter. Removing trade restrictions would anger the merchant guilds. Acknowledging human sentience would overturn centuries of academic consensus. The Elder's ancient eyes, clouded with age but still sharp with intelligence, fixed on Thren. "Then perhaps we must change the charter. Perhaps we must anger the merchant guilds. Perhaps our academic consensus was wrong. He paused. The humans are not asking us for charity. They're asking us to treat them as equals. Is that truly so difficult? No one answered. The question hung in the air like a weight none of them were willing to carry. Meanwhile, on Earth, life continued much as it always had. The sun rose and set. People went to work, raised their families, lived their lives. The Great Withdrawal had caused some economic disruption, of course. Trade with the galaxy had been valuable, and losing it hurt. But humanity had been self-sufficient before they joined the Council, and they were self-sufficient now. Secretary General Patricia Blake held regular press conferences to update the public on the galactic situation. She spoke about the crises with sympathy but without urgency. Earth was not responsible for solving those problems anymore. We have offered to help, she said in one conference. We have told the Council that we are willing to negotiate new agreements based on mutual respect and equal partnership. They have not accepted our terms. Are people dying because of our withdrawal? A reporter asked. Patricia paused before answering. People are dying because the galaxy built systems that depended on human labor and then refused to treat humans as partners in those systems. We did not create that dependency. We simply stopped enabling it. It was a harsh answer, but it was honest. And after 73 years of being treated like servants, humanity was done being anything but honest. 1 year after the withdrawal, the galaxy came to Earth. They came not as rulers or teachers, not as the superior beings who had spent 73 years looking down on humanity. They came as supplicants, desperate and afraid, carrying the weight of a civilization that was falling apart around them. High Counselor Thren himself led the delegation. It was the first time in 800 years that an Arshinate leader had traveled to another species' homeworld. The journey took 3 weeks because the hyperspace beacon network was so damaged that even priority vessels had to take long detours around dead zones. Thren spent those 3 weeks reading reports of new disasters, new failures, new deaths. By the time his ship entered Earth's solar system, he had aged visibly. He was accompanied by representatives from 30 major species, all of them competing for position, all of them hoping to secure human help for their particular crisis. The Velthari wanted mediators for their ongoing border disputes. The Korvathi wanted engineers to rebuild their damaged fleet. The Syndicate wanted doctors to fight the plagues spreading through their worlds. The Rim Collective wanted agricultural experts to end the famines. Everyone wanted something. No one had thought to bring anything to offer in return. Secretary General Patricia Blake received them in Geneva, the old United Nations building that humanity had preserved as a historical monument. It was the same hall where 73 years ago human diplomats had begged the Galactic Council for membership. The irony was intentional. Patricia was 63 years old. A career diplomat who had spent her entire adult life being condescended to by beings like Thren. She had been passed over for promotions because alien species did not trust human judgment. She had watched her proposals ignored, her insights dismissed, her contributions credited to others. She had smiled through it all, kept her anger hidden, done her job. Now she sat at the head of a long table, watching the most powerful beings in the galaxy file in and take seats below her. Her security details stood along the walls, every one of them human. There were no alien guards here, no mixed forces, no pretense of partnership. This was Earth, and on Earth, humans made the rules. Thren approached the table first. Ass was proper for the highest-ranking visitor. He moved slowly, his ancient body showing the strain of the journey. When he reached his seat, he did something that no Arshinate had done in the presence of a younger species for thousands of years. He bowed. Secretary General Blake, he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and something that might have been shame. I come before you as a representative of the Galactic Council, seeking to repair what has been broken between our peoples. Patricia studied him for a long moment. She had prepared for this meeting extensively, consulted with historians and psychologists and diplomats. She knew exactly what Thren was trying to do, and she was not impressed. High Counselor, she said, you have traveled a long way. Please sit. We have much to discuss. The delegations took their seats. For a moment, No one spoke. Then Thren cleared his throat and began. The Council acknowledges that humanity has been treated unfairly, he said. We understand now that your contributions to galactic civilization were greater than we recognized. We see that your withdrawal has caused significant hardship across many worlds. We are here to ask for your help. Patricia nodded slowly. We appreciate your acknowledgement. But I must ask, what specifically do you now understand that you did not understand before? Thren hesitated. Around him, the other delegates shifted nervously. They had prepared speeches about mutual benefit and shared destiny, about the importance of cooperation and the dangers of isolation. They had not prepared for direct questions. We understand that your contributions were valuable, Thren said finally. Valuable, Patricia repeated. That is an interesting word. It suggests something that can be measured, traded, compensated. Is that how you see our contributions? As a commodity? No, of course not. We understand that humanity gave freely, without expectation of reward. And yet you treated us as if our gifts were owed to you. You accepted our help while denying us respect. You used our labor while questioning our intelligence. You relied on our expertise while debating whether we were truly sentient. Patricia leaned forward. High Counselor, do you understand how insulting that was? Thren's ancient face showed something that might have been pain. I am beginning to understand. Beginning.
Patricia sat back.
That is honest, at least. More honest than most of what we have heard from the Council over the past year. She turned to address the full room. The delegates watched her with expressions ranging from hope to fear to resentment. Some of them still did not understand why they were here, why they had to ask permission from a species they had always considered inferior. Let me be clear about Earth's position, Patricia said. We are willing to resume cooperation with the Galactic Council. We are willing to share our expertise, our resources, our labor, but we will not do so under the old terms. We are not servants. We are not tools to be used when convenient and discarded when not. We are equals, or we are nothing at all. What terms do you require? Asked the syndicate representative, his mechanical voice eager. Name them. The Council will consider any reasonable request. Patricia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That is exactly the problem. You speak of considering our requests. You speak of evaluating whether our terms are reasonable. You still see yourselves as the judges and us as the petitioners. Nothing has changed except your desperation. Oh. Then what would you have us do? Thren asked. Patricia reached into a folder and pulled out a document. It was printed on paper, an ancient human custom that she had chosen deliberately. Paper was permanent. Paper could not be edited or deleted. Paper was a commitment. These are our terms, she said, passing copies to each delegation. Full voting rights in the Galactic Council, proportional to population. Removal of all discriminatory trade restrictions. Formal recognition of human sentience and emotional capacity, with a public apology for the academic literature that questioned both. Establishment of humanity as a permanent mediating authority with the right to refuse any particular mediation. The delegates read the terms in silence. Some of them looked relieved. These were significant demands, but they were also achievable. Earth was not asking for dominance or revenge. They were asking for fairness. But then they reached the final page, and their relief turned to confusion. The last term, said the Velthri delegate, I do not understand. You ask that all species contribute equally to common infrastructure. That no species be expected to carry disproportionate burdens? Yes, Patricia said. That is exactly what we ask. But that would mean that we cannot rely on human expertise anymore. We would have to develop our own capabilities, train our own engineers, build our own systems. Yes, it would. The chamber fell silent. Deputy Secretary Andrew Kim, sitting beside Patricia, watched the delegates struggle with the implications. They had come here expecting to trade some political concessions for a return to the old system, a system where humanity did the hard work while everyone else enjoyed the benefits. They were only now realizing that the old system was dead. This is not what we expected, Thren said slowly. I know, Patricia replied. You expected us to be grateful for any recognition you offered. You expected us to rush back to our old positions, happy to be acknowledged at last, but we have spent the last year thinking about what we really want, and it is not acknowledgement. It is partnership. True partnership, where every species contributes according to their abilities and benefits according to their needs. But we are not capable of maintaining the beacon network. A merchant guild representative protested. We do not have the expertise. Then you will learn. As we learned. As every species learns when they have no choice but to grow. The delegates looked at each other, uncertain. This was not the desperate, grateful humanity they had expected to find. This was something new, something confident and calm and absolutely unwilling to compromise. Thren studied Patricia for a long moment. In his 8,000 years of life, he had negotiated with countless species, watched empires rise and fall, seen every form of ambition and desperation. But he had never seen anything quite like this. "You do not need us," he said finally. "That is what you are saying. You have survived this year without us. You could continue to survive indefinitely. You are not negotiating from weakness." "No," Patricia agreed. "We are not. Then why negotiate at all? Why not simply leave us to our fate?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Because we remember what it was like to need help and have none offered. Because we spent 73 years trying to make the galaxy a better place, and we still believe that is possible. Because walking away forever would mean giving up on everything we worked for." She looked around the room at the desperate, confused faces of beings who had once thought themselves her superiors. "We want to come back," she said, "but not as servants. Not as fools who give everything and receive nothing. We want to come back as partners, as equals, as one voice among many. If you can accept that, truly accept it, then we can begin again. If not..." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The delegates took the document back to their ships, back to their worlds, back to councils and assemblies that would debate for months. But everyone in that room knew how the debate would end. The galaxy needed humanity. And for the first time in 73 years, humanity was in a position to demand what they deserved. The 90 days that Patricia Blake had promised stretched into 120. It was not cruelty that caused the delay. It was necessity. The galaxy needed time to change, and change did not happen quickly. During those 4 months, something unexpected began to occur. Species that had relied on humanity for generations discovered that they could, in fact, solve their own problems. It was not easy. It was not elegant, but it was possible. The Velthari-Korvathi War, which had dragged on for nearly a year, finally ended through the efforts of a young syndicate diplomat named Veth. She had studied under Bezeth Catherine Shaw years ago, learned negotiation techniques that humans had developed over centuries of conflict resolution. Now she applied those techniques herself, sitting between two bitter enemies and finding common ground. Where everyone had assumed none existed, the ceasefire she negotiated was not perfect. Both sides had grievances that remained unaddressed, but it held. For the first time in the history of the Galactic Council, major conflict had been resolved without human intervention. Veth became famous overnight. She was interviewed by news services across the galaxy, asked to explain how she had achieved what everyone thought impossible. Her answer was always the same. "I learned from the humans," she said. "They taught me that every conflict has a solution, if you are patient enough to find it. They taught me that listening is more important than speaking. They taught me that enemies can become friends if someone is willing to build the bridge between them." "Why did you not learn these things before?" one interviewer asked. Veth was quiet for a moment. "Because we did not have to," she said finally. "The humans were always there to do it for us. We never needed to learn, so we never did." On the Rim Collective Worlds, the famine was slowly being addressed. The Communion, an ancient and isolationist species that had refused to involve itself in younger species' affairs for thousands of years, finally broke their long silence. They sent food ships, agricultural experts, seed stocks from their own archives. It was not enough to end the crisis immediately, but it was a beginning, The communion elders released a statement explaining their decision. "We have watched younger species struggle and fail for millennia," the statement read. "We believe that struggle was necessary for growth, that intervention would only weaken those we tried to help. But we have seen now what happens when one species carries the burden for all others. The humans grew strong because they faced their challenges alone. They helped others without being asked, and they were punished for their kindness with contempt and dismissal. We will not make the same mistake. When species struggle, we will offer help. When they succeed, we will celebrate with them. We are all part of the same galaxy, and we must all care for each other." The hyperspace beacon network remained damaged, but it was slowly being repaired. Merchant Guild engineers, working from human technical manuals, had begun the long process of learning how to maintain the system themselves. They made mistakes. Ships were lost. But with each failure, they learned, and the next repair went a little better. Guildmaster Patricia Venn, the human who had stayed behind to observe, finally returned to Earth after watching the first successful independent repair mission. "They can do it," she reported to the Secretary General. "It will take years, maybe decades, before they are as good as we were. But they are learning. They are growing. They do not need us to hold their hands anymore." Secretary General Patricia Blake received the news with satisfaction. This was what she had hoped for, what Earth had planned for from the beginning. The withdrawal had never been about punishing the galaxy. It had been about forcing the galaxy to grow up. When the 120th day arrived, Patricia sent Earth's response to the Galactic Council. It was not a simple acceptance of their terms. It was a new proposal, one that reflected everything that had happened during the long months of negotiation. Full voting rights for humanity were accepted immediately, as expected. The trade restrictions were removed. The formal recognition of human sentience was issued with a public apology that was broadcast across the galaxy. These were the easy parts. It's the concessions that the Council had been prepared to make from the beginning. But the final term, the one that mattered most, was also accepted. All species would contribute equally to common infrastructure. No species would be expected to carry disproportionate burdens. The era of humanity as the galaxy's caretakers was officially over. The signing ceremony took place on Nexus Prime, in the same chamber where Catherine Shaw had announced humanity's withdrawal 15 months earlier. The chamber looked different now. New podiums had been installed, arranged in a circle rather than a hierarchy. The human delegation's position was no longer at the back, but equal to all others. Catherine Shaw returned for the ceremony, though she had officially retired from diplomatic service. She stood beside Secretary General Blake as the new charter was signed. "Watching the representatives of 400 species commit to a new way of working together, how does it feel?" Patricia asked her quietly. Catherine thought about the question. She remembered the day she had walked out of this chamber uncertain whether she was doing the right thing. She remembered the months of watching the galaxy suffer, wondering if the cost had been too high. She remembered the faces of the delegates who had come to Earth, desperate and afraid. "But it feels like the beginning of something," she said. "Not the end. The beginning." After the ceremony, a Corvathi journalist requested an interview with Catherine. The journalist was young, barely out of school by the standards of her species. She had grown up during the crisis years, had watched her world suffer from the consequences of the withdrawal. She had questions that needed answers. "Ambassador Shaw," she said, "many people believe that humanity's withdrawal was cruel, that you punished the galaxy for the sins of a few leaders, that innocent people died because of your pride. How do you respond to that?" Catherine considered her answer carefully. This was not a question that could be answered with diplomatic pleasantries. It deserved honesty. "People did die," she said. "We knew they would when we made our decision. We did not take that lightly. Every life lost during the crisis was a weight on our conscience, and it always will be." "Then why did you do it?" "Because we saw no other way to achieve real change. For 73 years, we tried to reform the system from within. We filed complaints, submitted proposals, participated in committees. Nothing worked. The galaxy was happy to use us, but never willing to accept us. If we had stayed, nothing would have changed. Our grandchildren would have faced the same discrimination we faced. and their grandchildren after them. Catherine paused, looking at the young journalist with eyes that had seen too much. Sometimes, the only way to change a system is to step outside of it. Sometimes people only learn to value something when they lose it. We did not leave because we wanted power. We left because we wanted equality. And sometimes, the only way to achieve equality is to let everyone else discover what they are capable of without you. The journalist was quiet for a moment, processing the answer. Then she asked one final question. Do you think it was worth it? Catherine looked around the chamber, at the new configuration of podiums, at the species who had once looked down on humanity, now standing as equals. She thought about the young syndicate diplomat who had ended a war. She thought about the communion elders who had broken their isolation to help others. She thought about the engineers who had learned to maintain the beacon network themselves. Ask me again in 100 years, she said. But right now, today, yes. I think it was worth it. The galaxy had panicked when humans walked away. They had begged, pleaded, negotiated, struggled. They had faced their own limitations and found strength they did not know they had. They had learned that dependency was not the same as partnership, that taking someone for granted was not the same as accepting them. Humanity returned to the galactic stage, but differently now. They served on councils and committees, contributed their expertise and their labor. But they also demanded respect. They also said no when they were treated unfairly. They also expected others to carry their share of the burden. It was not a perfect system. No system was perfect. There would still be conflicts, still be misunderstandings, still be moments when old prejudices resurfaced. But there was also hope. Hope that the galaxy could be better than it had been. Hope that species could learn from their mistakes. Hope that the future would be brighter than the past. And in that hope, humanity had found something they had been searching for since. They first looked up at the stars, a place where they truly belonged. Not as servants, not as tools, not as convenient helpers to be used and discarded as equals. As partners, as one voice among many, no more and no less. The galaxy had learned its lesson. And humanity, patient and determined and impossibly stubborn, had taught them well.